This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here's your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Ready or not, the elections will be 32 days from now. It's been a most unusual campaign because of COVID-19, but it's now on us, and we want to talk about the 200,000 ballots already turned in, absentee ballots, what we can expect from early voting, and what voters have on their minds as they mark their ballots. The closing days of this contest are proving to be very excited, and our panel this week includes two of our state's top political scientists, professors, Dr. Susan Roberts from Davidson College and Dr. Michael Bitzer from Catawba College, both of whom write regularly for the Old North State blog. And joining them, our regular panelist John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, and Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
Let's begin the spin. It seems like a month ago, but Tuesday we had the first presidential debate, if you want to call it that, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I want to ask all of the panelists, Tuesday night was like nothing we've ever seen before. I'd like your impressions of it. Michael Bitzer, I'll start with you.
It was certainly something we have never seen in modern political history. And I actually went in the next day to my campaigns and elections class and apologized to the students, some of whom had seen that debate as their first presidential debate. It was not a presidential debate. It was a speaking over each other. And it really did an injustice, I thought, to the American public.
I agree with you. Susan?
Well, I think I too talked to my class about it, my presidency class, and said you were witnessing something very historic. I think that it was a debacle. I think the cacophony, just listening to it without even watching the debate, as well as the lack of information. And political scientists say information gathering is a function of debates. I've always felt that may be a little misguided. Chris
Fitzsimon.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I think it's we probably ought to say that this was President Trump's plan. He has sort of eviscerated every norm in politics. If you're in his base, you think that's a good thing. I think a lot of Americans, the majority of Americans, apparently from polls afterwards, didn't think it was a good thing. He went into the debate not willing to have a debate and wanted to turn it into sort of a shout fest, and that's what he's got. That's what he got, and I don't think that it served him or the American people well at all.
John Hood, your reactions.
Well, I saw a lot of people call the debate a dumpster fire, which I think is an insult to dumpster arsonists, because at least with a dumpster fire, at the end, you reduce the volume of garbage. And in this case, there's more garbage than ever. I think it was, in many ways, though, I will have to say, I also think it accurately presented information about these candidates to the viewers. Donald Trump came across as an obnoxious bully. That's who he is. Joe Biden at times sort of showed that he wasn't at the top of his game and was somewhat hesitant to distance himself from the left wing of his party. And I think that's also probably an accurate picture. But accurate picture and uplifting moment in democracy are certainly not the same thing.
Many of us have had to moderate debates or panels similar to what we're doing here now. I got to tell you, I felt so sorry for Chris Wallace. I didn't know what to do. He lost control of this thing about 60 seconds into the debate. Susan, the big question is, what can be done in future to prevent situations like this?
Sure, I think that people have talked about muting and such, but I was really curious, how are you going to change the format of a town hall debate? And that was one, I mean, of course, you couldn't have the president walking around. It was very, I mean, to be honest, it was very lucky that there was no handshake before or after. That could have been very ugly visually.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Michael, I'd be interested in, the town hall is a form of a debate, but is there, truthfully, are debates really serving any purposes anymore?
Generally, in the political science literature, I think most of the acknowledgement of debates is that they have very little input or effect overall. Certainly, if there's a monumental gaffe or something big that happens, it could move things slightly. But we are in such a polarized and set electorate right now. 90 to 95% of the people have their minds made up. My thinking is if we go with a town hall debate, which is questionable now with the president being diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus, perhaps we should have a Zoom debate and allow the moderators to mute people while the other side is speaking. That would be my solution, but we're just in uncharted territory right now.
I'm not even sure how effective that would have been, because they would have still continued talking and you could have heard them off mic a little bit. The other big newsmaker this week had to do with absentee ballots. We talked about this last week on the show. We got part of the story. This week we got more developments so far as the absentee ballots and the State Board of Elections attempt to try to take those ballots that had been issued, that had been mailed, and didn't have the correct information, mostly regarding witnesses. A federal court judge, William Osteen, basically issued a ruling this week, John, that said, whoa, wait a minute here. The State Board of Elections is trying to rewrite a law, which they don't have permission or authority to be able to do. And the question now is, where are we?
Well, it's a confusing story because there's multiple lawsuits. There's a state court issue, which we talked about last week, that involved the Attorney General, Josh Stein, and the State Board of Elections appearing to settle a lawsuit. I thought it was a collusive settlement. I think that's now evident that that was the case. But they were trying to settle the lawsuit to basically make some changes that had not been affected by legislative action. The federal judge that you're talking about, Osteen, he didn't actually issue a ruling. What he did is he slapped back a claim from the State Board of Elections that they were saying that allowing people not to necessarily have a witness signature, but to attest after the fact if there was no witness signature or there was a problem with the witness information, that it was their ballot, that was an in run around the law that he had upheld, the law requiring a witness signature. There's still the question of what the state court will do. There is now a new federal lawsuit in the Eastern District with the Republicans, both at the state level and the federal level, challenging the collusive settlement as a violation of the Constitution. This story is far from over.
Yeah, Chris, what's going to happen here? I mean, we know we've got these ballots that have come in. Some of them have been incorrectly filled out, not having witnesses and signatures and so forth like that. The latest news this past week was the State Board of Elections sent instructions to all the county boards of elections saying, hold on to them, don't do anything right now until we get more clarification from the courts. How's this all going to turn out, and are we going to get some definitive clarity on this before the elections November 3rd?
Well, I'm not sure of that, and who knows how it's going to turn out. I do think all this jumble of lawsuits will eventually be resolved. You know, a couple of things that are interesting, and Michael Bitzer will have more handle on the exact numbers, but the overwhelming majority of absentee ballots that have been turned in have been accepted. So we're talking about a small number of absentee ballots. We don't know whether the margin, I'm sure in some races it will be important, in other races it won't be important, what even the numbers are if it's not resolved by Election Day. But I don't agree that it was a collusive lawsuit. I actually think the state board, the Republican members, I think once everything was released, were shown to have known a lot more than they let on when they resigned, which is a whole other political part of this whole thing. But for the average voter, it does what President Trump and others want to do, which is it adds more confusion to the election.
A little sidebar to this is the news that broke late last week that perhaps they had been coerced to resign from members of the Republican Party. But, Michael, there are people who are on both sides who are saying this is nothing more than an attempt to intimidate voters and perhaps undermine the voting process in North Carolina. Do you see that?
It is unfortunate, but I think we are steadily heading down that path. It's my hope that we don't, that voters can feel confident in returning their absentee by mail ballot. We have 1.1 million North Carolinians having requested one. We have 320,000 that have returned them and been accepted. But there are some real key differences, and the key difference is whether you voted absentee by mail or not. For the vast majority of those that have been marked as deficient, not rejected, but as deficient, typically those people voted in person. It's a different vote method, and some people may be getting hung up on those crucial components of returning the ballots.
Say that again now. You're giving me some information I didn't know about. The majority of deficient ballots are because of in person?
No, because they voted in person last time.
Because they voted.
And so
they
may
voted
not
in
know.
2016 in person.
Wow.
So this is the first time they're casting a mail-in
Correct.
ballot, and they're making errors. Particularly, they might not be getting a witness signature. The addresses might be incorrect. This was always the risk, and we've talked about this on the show before, for all the benefits in the COVID scenario that mail-in balloting offers us. As we see in other states, there are risks. There are risks not of massive voter fraud, though that's possible, as we saw in 2018, but because of voter error, we might have some spoiled ballots. And as Chris says, if the margins are large, this won't matter. But if the margins are small, as we saw in 2016 in North Carolina, then this number of ballots that get messed up by error could end up being significant.
Chris, a part of this story that I haven't been able to discern is the State Board of Elections also allowed the establishment of special drop boxes for people who vote by absentee, because there's a large concern about the U.S. Postal Service. Frankly, there's been so much dissension and discussion about the Postal Service not being able to get the ballots to the boards of election. So they set up these special drop boxes. How did all of this play out insofar as the drama this week?
Well, I think this is a big issue, not just in North Carolina, but around the country. I wish we could all agree the goal ought to be that everybody who wants to vote is able to vote, and all the external things this year, all the hurdles, COVID being primary among them, we need to figure out ways to help people vote. It used to be in America not too long ago, really. Everybody agreed the best thing was to make it easy for people to vote safely and securely. Now we literally have a political party and an agenda that wants to make it harder. The governor of Texas just eliminated all these drop box sites in Texas to make it much harder for people to vote. That's what we're up against in this whole election. We're arguing about whether or not people actually should be able to vote, in my mind, which is very dangerous to democracy.
Susan, one of the aspects of this that sort of intrigued me a little bit is 50% of the requests. Michael talked about the fact that we've had more than 1 million requests for absentee mail-in ballots. 50% of them have come from Democrats, only 17% from Republicans. Is this because of the fact that the president has really been downplaying and alleging the impropriety of mail-in ballots? Is that the reason why so few Republicans have requested them?
I think that's a very real possibility. And I also think you have the seeds of confusion. I'm curious, and we won't know this, how many people have requested ballots and intend to vote in person. And I think I've requested one. I intend to vote in person. I think that's confusing. I think this sort of news, as well as the news about the lawsuits, vote twice, people are reluctant to have their ballot not count. And I think if you look at the news that's been national about, according breakdowns by race of the ballots that were deficient, that's very unfortunate too. And that's the kind of news that, unfortunately, again, that North Carolina seems to get. And that doesn't look good for us as a progressive state.
Yeah, and I, for one, happen to be one of those people you were talking about. I requested the absentee ballot just in case there were reasons why I couldn't vote in person. My intent, however, is to go to vote in person.
But Tom, you can also take that absentee by mail ballot and hand deliver it back to your county board of elections or to an early voting site. North Carolinians need to know they have the opportunity to do that, to deliver in person their absentee by mail ballot.
John, is this whole saga leading to lawsuits that might impact the outcome of the election or might even determine how long it takes us to get an outcome?
The latter, I think, is more likely than the former. Again, if we had a very close race, and we should all remember that we are sitting in North Carolina talking about absentee ballots. And 2 years ago, we had a mishandling, a conspiracy to mishandle absentee ballots that resulted in a new election. And one of the ways that was detected, that elaborate process of collecting and harvesting ballots, maybe changing them or filling them out and so forth, the way that was detected was the witness signatures and the log when you brought in ballots. That's how they figured out there was a ballot harvesting scheme going on. That's why, while it is important to maximize the opportunities for people to vote, we do have to take precautions against ballot harvesting and other misuses of absentee ballots, because we are sitting in a state that recently had an election invalidated on those grounds.
The irony of that, though, the irony of that is that it was a Republican effort, and the Republicans were actually doing that. And at the same time, Republicans nationally, including the president's campaign, are encouraging people around the country to use vote by mail or absentee ballots at the very time he's trying to express doubt or seed doubt about their effectiveness. It doesn't make any sense.
There are accusations on both sides. Michael, let me get to your sweet spot here. You've done a lot of research, and I love the detail you go into on the Old North State blog. We've had 1.6 million new registrants in the state of North Carolina since 2016. Tell us who they are and what you know about them.
Well, a significant number of them are registered unaffiliated, and they are also under the age of 40. And this is a dynamic that is going to shape North Carolina politics for the foreseeable future. We know that these registered unaffiliated voters are indeed partisan. We just don't know how they tend to lean towards one party over the other. But this is a dynamic that is really going to impact how elections and how predictions are made about North Carolina politics. And it is a continuing to grow state that we are experiencing this. We could see potentially 5 million ballots cast in this year's election. Wow. That would be a record.
Yeah, that would be a record. Age, sex, race, any interesting aspects of that so far as these new registrants?
Yeah, the new registrants are very racially diverse, and that reflects the generation of millennials and now Gen Zs. Those voters under the age of 40, they are actually a plurality of all 7.1 million registered voters in this state.
Susan, the early voting begins October 15th, and there are a lot of question marks surrounding whether there are going to be enough poll workers, what kind of lines we're going to have, and so forth like that. President Trump has said he wants to have poll watchers on Election Day and in early voting. What do we know about what you can and can't do? If you want to be an observer, which we have had in the past to watch the voting process, just how involved can they be? And some are worrying about perhaps maybe some of these poll watchers might be intimidating voters. Tell us about what you know about that.
Sure, it doesn't take much to intimidate a voter. And the Republican Party was, there was a consent decree in 1980, and they have not had the same sort of numbers or allowance for poll watchers. And that's something that's a little confusing to me. But I think if you look at poll watchers, they're supposed to be, I think there is a vetting process, and Michael can correct me, not vetting as much as they receive a little training. What I think is confusing to a lot of voters is, can there be kind of a gaggle outside and let that be intimidating as well? One of my friends, and this doesn't get to the poll watcher question, but in line at the polls, you will have maskers and anti-maskers. And if you have that and you have tension, could that turn people away? Could they just leave and not be in the line and take their absentee ballot and give it to one of the county boards or one of the drop boxes. So while I don't have the details about what poll watchers can do, I think they're supposed to look for long lines, irregularities, but they're supposed to be neutral beyond belief.
Chris, we're understanding that the presidential campaign in North Carolina is within the margin of error. I mean, I see one has a 1-point lead or a 2-point lead. The other one, they go back and forth. I've been watching Real Clear Politics to try to figure out the combination of all the polls in North Carolina. Any idea what might be the final nail in the coffin, one way or the other, for one of the other candidates?
No, I mean, it's, we're talking on, October 2nd, and we just all woke up to the news that the president and the first lady had tested positive for COVID-19. Nobody knows how that's going to affect the race. We hope, and everybody hopes, that he and the first lady certainly recover and don't suffer. But we don't know what that means for the politics of that. What does that mean for his policies, his supporters, all those things? And that's just the second day of October. There'll be 3 or 4 more October surprises before it's over. I do think the presidential race in North Carolina will be very close.
I do too. John, so far as it goes, another race, a high dollar, high visibility race in North Carolina, is this U.S. Senate race, Cal Cunningham and Tom Tillis. They had just finished their last debate in which each of them tried to label the other one as a rubber stamp candidate, which I found to be very unusual. Tillis says that the Republicans can't hold on to the U.S. Senate if they lose this contest. You agree with that? And will that stimulate voters?
It is mathematically possible for the Republicans to hold the U.S. Senate and Tom Tillis to lose, but it strikes me as improbable. And I think one of the reasons why so much money in the most recent quarter flowed into Cal Cunningham's campaign is that Democrats around the country and Republicans around the country realize that North Carolina is likely to be a tipping point state when it comes, maybe not to the presidential race, but to the U.S. Senate control. And if the Republicans win in North Carolina, there's a chance they could lose elsewhere and still hold the Senate. If they lose, that probably tells us the Senate will be going Democratic. The
polls have typically shown Tom Tillis behind throughout the course of this, but again, it's within the margin of error. Michael, handicap this race for us. What do you think is going to happen here?
I think it's certainly toss-up, maybe a slight lean Democratic. It is the spread between the two candidates is slightly bigger than it is at the presidential, but it's smaller than at the gubernatorial level. So we are going into a classic North Carolina situation of competitiveness at the top 3 big ticket items at the top of the ballot.
Susan, we've been saying the whole time that this race was really all about Trump. Will it make a difference how Trump does in North Carolina in this Senate race and on down the ballot?
Well, I think that's one's really assessment. I think if you look at the fact that I think yesterday roll call changed the race between Tillis and Cunningham from a toss-up to a tilt Democrat. And I think they're watching the numbers. I do think that it's possible that Tillis can lose and Trump win. Tillis has never had very high approval ratings. And I don't know now if it's between Real Clear Politics 0.5% Biden. That's nothing. And I think that what might happen, you're going to have a strong finish, I think, and people that watch Raleigh more closely.
Tillis certainly has, Cunningham certainly has the monetary advantage in this. I want to move to the gubernatorial race for a second. Roy Cooper has had a big lead over his opponent, Dan Forrest. My understanding is that his popularity is beginning to decline some. Is that reflective on the way he's handling the coronavirus, Chris?
Well, I don't know. I think that is true, and I think people are tired of the coronavirus. But as I point out on NC Spin every week, North Carolina's death rate from the coronavirus is half of many of our southern neighbors. So I think people are just angry and frustrated and taking it out on people. But he is far away leading this race. So that would be the shocker of all shockers. And actually, I think you could argue that there's Democratic momentum. A lot of state roll call just moved Ohio into the toss-up. Anyway, the Democrats are gaining around the country. I think that will be true in North Carolina, too.
John, what are the issues people are going to have on their minds when they go to the polls and vote?
COVID-19, unrest in our cities and the economy. Almost nothing else will matter in my view.
Michael, what do you think the turnout is going to be? Are we going to see you said we could have as many as, what'd you say, 5 million voters?
5 million out of 7.1 million could potentially show up. That would hit us at about 69, 70%, which is a norm in North Carolina. If it goes over 70% voter turnout among registered voters, all bets are off.
Wow. Great discussion, and we hope you've enjoyed this special edition of NC Spin, and we want to thank Michael Bitzer and Susan Roberts both for their great insights. Next week, we return to our regular format. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and while there, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and to our podcast and NC Spin on the YouTube channel. But join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.